I declare open the second session of the Preparatory Committee for the Third UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, established pursuant to General Assembly Resolution 68211 of the 20th of December 2013. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome all participants to the first meeting of the second session of the Preparatory Committee for the Third United Nations World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. Before proceeding further, I invite the Preparatory Committee to turn to item 2 of the provisional agenda, namely elections of officers. Participants would recall that pursuant to General Assembly Resolution 68211, a Bureau Excellencies, delegates, can I seek your cooperation in taking your seats so that we can commence with the morning session? Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome all participants to the first meeting of the second session of the Preparatory Committee for the Third United Nations World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. Before proceeding further, I invite the Preparatory Committee to turn to item 2 of the provisional agenda, namely election of officers. Participants would recall that pursuant to General Assembly Resolution 68211, a Bureau of the Preparatory Committee was established at its first session, consisting of 2 members of each regional group and a representative of Japan as an ex officio member, and that Bureau elected its own co-chairs. The Bureau has since been informed that His Excellency Walid Abdel Nasser, former permanent representative of Egypt to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva, and His Excellency Abdul Hanan, former permanent representative of Bangladesh to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva, have completed their tour of duty with their respective permanent missions and can no longer perform the duties of vice chairs of the Preparatory Committee. It is my understanding that there is general agreement that their respective successors, His Excellency Amir Ramadan, permanent representative of Egypt to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva, and His Excellency Shamim Ahsan, permanent representative of Bangladesh to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva, should serve as vice chairs of the Preparatory Committee. May I take it that the Preparatory Committee agrees to elect His Excellency Amir Ramadan, permanent representative of Egypt to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva, and His Excellency Shamim Ahsan, permanent representative of Bangladesh to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva, as vice chairs of the Preparatory Committee for the Third United Nations World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. I therefore declare elected His Excellency Amir Ramadan, Permanent Representative of Egypt to United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva, and His Excellency Tamim Azan, Permanent Representative of Bangladesh to United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva, as Vice Chairs of the Preparatory Committee for the 3rd United Nations World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. I wish to congratulate both His Excellency Amir Ramadan and His Excellency Tamim Azan on their elections. In addition, I have been informed that His Excellency Takashi Okada, Deputy Permanent Representative of Japan to United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva, has completed his tour of duty with the Permanent Mission of Japan and can no longer perform the duties of the ex officio member of the Bureau of the Preparatory Committee. Accordingly, his successor, Her Excellency Misako Kaji, Deputy Permanent Representative of Japan to United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva, would serve as an ex officio member of the Bureau of the Preparatory Committee. At this point, allow me to say a few opening remarks. Allow me first to once again welcome you to the second session of the Preparatory Committee. We are gathered today in the Assembly Hall, where, in addition to 150 member states and their delegations, there are also observers representing over 40 intergovernmental organizations and the United Nations entities, as well as observers representing over 100 organizations from the major groups. Combined, we make up over 1,000 individuals traveling together on the road to Sendai. The large turnout for this preparatory meeting is a strong message in itself. It reflects the inclusiveness in the preparatory process as called for by the United Nations General Assembly, as well as the importance of and the commitment we all share in trying to strengthen resilience and reduce disaster losses. The next 2 days will be crucial. It will be a test of stamina, as well as a test of political will for states to continue the tradition of cooperation, inclusiveness, and innovation that is the aim of the United Nations. At the first PrepCom, we reaffirmed our call for an outcome that was concise, focused, forward-looking, and action-oriented. Since then, we had before us the pre-zero draft, which went through an intensive open-ended, informal consultative process, and we now have in front of us the zero draft, circulated by the co-chairs on the 20th of October, and which forms the basis of negotiations that will start this afternoon. I am hopeful that these negotiations will make good progress, building upon the goodwill shown during the open-ended, informal consultative meetings held in September and October, and united by our common desire to continue the good work that began under the Hyogo Framework for Action, adopted nearly 10 years ago. I now give the floor to my fellow co-chair of the Preparatory Committee, Her Excellency Päivi Karamo, to deliver her opening remarks.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Ambassador Tani. I obviously echo the sentiments expressed by my co-chair on the Preparatory Committee's ability to move forward efficiently and decisively on whatever tasks lie before it. Firstly, in addition to producing the first draft of the post-2015 framework for disaster risk reduction, the Preparatory Committee also has the task of agreeing on a program of the work for the World Conference and to agree to endorse the President of the World Conference. Secondly, with regard to our upcoming negotiations, I have also witnessed myself the spirit of cooperation demonstrated by members throughout the preparatory process, and therefore share the same confidence that Ambassador Tani has expressed regarding the Committee's ability to unite in producing the first draft of the future framework. As with the PrepCom 1, time is of the essence. As part of our duties as co-chairs, Ambassador Tani and I propose modalities for negotiations at the current PrepCom 2 that we believe will advance the process in a timely way and which meets the desire of Member States to produce a draft 1 at the end of PrepCom 2. Member States are fortunate to have a large group of observers joining us in these 2 days, including intergovernmental organizations, United Nations entities and major groups. In view of the negotiations being open to Member States only, many intergovernmental organizations, United Nations entities and major groups have taken the initiative to provide us with their views in writing, which have been compiled for the use of Member States and are available on the World Conference website. I would like to remind Member States, however, that we have the chance to interact substantively with intergovernmental organizations, United Nations entities and major groups at events such as shared dialogues and technical workshops. Tomorrow, before Member States negotiations come to a close, the co-chairs will ensure that time is devoted to establish, all of us together, in an open, inclusive and transparent manner, the modalities for beyond REPCOM 2. This will also include modalities for carrying out the work of the open-ended informal working group on targets and indicators. Together, all of us here today embody a wide variety of approaches to disaster risk reduction. Our ultimate aim is to ensure that the Preparatory Committee submits a draft framework to the World Conference that we are all proud of. I take this opportunity to wish you a good meeting ahead. That ends my remarks, and thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair.
I thank the co-chair for her remarks. I now give the floor to Ms. Margareta Wallström, Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction.
Thank you, Ambassador. And co-chairs, Kairamo and Ambassador Tani, Acting Director General Möller of the United Nations Office in Geneva, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues and friends. Almost a decade ago, the international community adopted the Yoga Framework for Action. The Yoga Framework for Action 2005-15, building the resilience of nations and communities to disasters. The words resilience, nations and communities remain even more important today. And that has become, I think, very evident in the discussions we've had over the past few months. Since 2005, we learned a lot about how disasters are generated, how they can be reduced, and how the creation of new risks can be prevented and mitigated. And today, what we do to reduce risk, and we have the key elements required to design a new post-2015 framework that can guide the work of communities, nations, and organizations in the coming decades. All I would like to say this morning is to thank all of you for being present here today. It's an impressive gathering, I would say, and for the contributions, formal and informal, so far in the process since the early spring. And in particular, I'd like to thank the co-chairs for steering this process firmly and sensitively. I'd like to thank member states who today have in their hands the responsibility for the outcome of these negotiations. I also like to thank the major groups who have been very active since the beginning of the process for substantive, strategic, and very thoughtful contributions. And of course, the UN system and the intergovernmental organizations who have played a key role in supporting the implementation of the HFA and, of course, now the World Conference preparatory process. And last of all, to thank Director General Michael Möller for not only hosting us here in the Palais des Nations, but also joining us here in this session and in this room, which we for the first time are making use of for our discussions on how we manage disaster risk in the coming decades. The expectations are high. I think the numbers here is a manifestation on that. As you all work for the common good in the interest of all nations and communities. And It is with this that we will proceed to work in the coming days and months for how to finalize our post-2015 disaster risk reduction framework. I wish to thank all of you again and to wish all of us an excellent work process. Thank you very much.
I thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction for her statement. I now give the floor to Mr. Michael Muller, Acting Head of the United Nations Office in Geneva.
Ambassador Kairamo, Ambassador Thongpakdi, Special Representative Wallström, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, a very warm welcome to International Geneva and to the Palais des Nations for the second session of the Preparatory Committee for the Third United Nations World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. I had the pleasure of being part of the first session in July, and I very much appreciate being able to support the important preparatory work leading up to the conference in Sendai next year. And let me, in my opening remarks, commend the strong efforts of the co-chairs, Ambassador Kairamo and Ambassador Thongpakdi, and Special Representative Wallström in taking this work forward, and express my deep appreciation to our host country, Switzerland, and the host country of the conference, Japan, for their support. Today I have the privilege of sharing with you the message of the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, for this session of the Preparatory Committee. And the message goes as follows, and I quote, "I am pleased to send greetings to all participants at this second session of the Preparatory Committee of the Third United Nations World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. Natural hazards and climate risk can take a potentially enormous toll on our societies if countries do not agree on wise, action-oriented measures to save lives, preserve livelihoods, and reduce economic losses. The post-2015 framework for disaster risk reduction must take up where the Hyogo framework for action leaves off, providing the world with the necessary tools and guidance to reduce risk levels and avoid new dangers. This will be important to our broader development efforts as the world strives next year to adopt a new universal climate agreement and a set of sustainable development goals. I wish you a most productive session as you pave the way for a successful Third United Nations Conference on disaster risk reduction." That was the end of the Secretary General's message. At the first session in July, I highlighted how disaster risk reduction cuts across the three dimensions of our work here in International Geneva: peace, rights, and well-being. And I firmly believe that we need to connect better our work on sustainable development and resilient societies by working across these dimensions in a more coherent manner, not least when it comes to disaster risk reduction. This is needed for a truly preventive approach. Disasters are destructive to people, economies, and the stability of states and communities. Natural hazards and climate risk have the potential to seriously undermine global and national efforts to eradicate poverty and build peace. Today, as we open the second PrepCom session, we also mark the beginning of Geneva Peace Week, which consists of a series of events that all are aimed at bringing together the many actors working on different aspects of peace promotion and to expand the space for dialogue about building peace and resolving conflict across these different communities. Geneva Peace Week is in its own right an example of a multi-stakeholder partnership and is a reminder of the multifaceted connections across the challenges we face and the need for a comprehensive approach. Conflicts can increase disaster risk together with other compounding factors and underlying risk drivers, all of which together can escalate the level of disaster loss. Placing sustainable development and risk reduction at the heart of domestic and international strategies will better contribute to the promotion of lasting peace and security, while peace building will contribute to sustainable development. If we do not take into consideration these links, we will miss the opportunity to craft the creative and forward-looking solutions that we need. The United Nations Office at Geneva is pleased to facilitate and support your important work, and I wish you all a very fruitful deliberations over the coming 2 days. Thank you very much.
I thank the Acting Head of the United Nations Office at Geneva. Distinguished delegates, we will now turn to Agenda Item 3, Adoption of the Agenda and Organization of Work of the Preparatory Committee. The committee will recall that following a series of open-ended informal consultative meetings held in September and October, on the basis of the pre-zero draft prepared by the co-chairs, circulated on the 20th of October 2014, we have circulated the zero draft on the basis for negotiations at this second session of the Preparatory Committee. The zero draft has been issued as document A conf.224.pc 2/L3 and Corrigendum 1, and is now before the committee. Subsequent to our letter on the 7th of November on the suggested modalities for proceeding with the negotiations on the zero draft of the outcome document, and following the views expressed by some delegations on the framework in which the negotiations should take place, I should now like to go through the modalities under which we envisage the process moving forward. The negotiations will begin with the first negotiation segment taking place this afternoon at 3 p.m. There will be only one open-ended negotiation segment without parallel negotiating segments. Major groups will be presented as observers without the right to speak. To make maximum progress, an all-night segment tonight starting at 6:30 p.m. is anticipated, with all arrangements made for security, food, and beverages. As interpretation in all official UN languages will be available only until 6 p.m. tonight, negotiations during the all-night segment will be in English only. We will proceed by a paragraph-by-paragraph on-screen consideration of the text. Those paragraphs for which delegations have no comment or that are subsequently edited on screen and agreed to by delegations will be marked as agreed ad ref. On the other hand, for those paragraphs for which there is no agreement, the relevant text, including proposals, will be placed in brackets. Here, to ensure that proposals are accurately reflected, delegations are asked to submit the proposals that were put forward during the negotiation segment by the end of the second session of the Preparatory Committee at 6 p.m. These will be reflected in the document. The text emanating from the negotiation segment of the Preparatory Committee, namely the document before us at 6 p.m. tomorrow, on Tuesday the 18th, will be the first draft of the outcome document, which will serve as the basis for further negotiations. Following the conclusion of the second session of the PrepCom, possible proposals received from member states in writing by the close of business Geneva time on the 20th of November will be included in a separate compilation document, which, as will proposals received earlier, but relate to paragraphs not yet covered during the negotiations. This will serve as a reference for future negotiations with a mandate by the PrepCom. As co-chairs, we will then circulate the first draft of the outcome document as a basis for further negotiations, along with the compilation document serving as reference. The first draft of the outcome document and the compilation document will also be made available on the official conference website. Are there any comments on the modalities that I have described? I recognize the distinguished representative of Argentina on behalf of GULAG.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Hago la presente declaración en nombre de los países miembros del GRULAC. En primer lugar, queremos agradecer a la Secretaría, a la Mesa y a sus copresidentes por los trabajos preparatorios de esta conferencia. GRULAC ha mantenido una actitud propositiva durante todo el proceso y queremos darle la seguridad que cuenta con nuestro compromiso y colaboración para el éxito de estas sesiones. En ese sentido, queremos hacer los siguientes comentarios sobre la metodología a implementar durante la segunda PREPCOM en las etapas siguientes de la negociación. 1. El GRULAC reitera la importancia que le otorga a que todos los documentos que se adopten en Sendai sean el resultado de negociaciones intergubernamentales. 2. El GRULAC considera que como resultado de esta segunda PREPCOM es necesario contar con un documento único, el borrador 1 del marco post-2015, que incluya todas las propuestas de lenguaje realizadas durante las sesiones de hoy y mañana, y que ese documento recoja dichas propuestas identificando a sus autores realizadas hasta el momento de concluir la sesión de mañana. Creemos que el borrador 1 debería ser la base de negociación en las reuniones posteriores, en el entendido de que es un texto vivo y progresivo que será enriquecido con nuevos aportes en las negociaciones programadas para diciembre o propuestas para diciembre y enero. 3. En cuanto a la declaración política, quisiéramos agradecer los elementos propuestos por Japón. Creemos que son una buena base, pero desearíamos iniciar el proceso negociador que elaborará el texto que será adoptado en Sendai lo antes posible. Finalmente, queremos reiterar la confianza depositada en los copresidentes y su guía para que este proceso de estados concluya exitosamente. Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished ambassador for his remarks. With this understanding, may I take it that the PrepCom agrees to the modalities for proceeding with negotiations on the zero draft? I hear no objections. It is so decided. Distinguished delegates, I will now turn to the provisional agenda and propose organizational work for the second session of the Preparatory Committee as contained in documents A-Conf 224/PC2/1 and 2, respectively, which you have before you. May I take it that the Preparatory Committee wishes to adopt the proposed agenda as contained in document A/Conf 224/PC2/1? I hear no objections. It is so decided. May I also take it that the Preparatory Committee wishes to adopt the proposed program of work as contained in document A/Conf 224/PC2/2, with the understanding that it may be revised further as warranted based on the progress and need of our work. I hear no objections. It is so decided. I now invite the attention of the Preparatory Committee to a note by the Secretariat contained in documents A/Conf 224/PC2/3 and Addendum 1, entitled Accreditation of Non-Governmental Organizations and Other Major Groups to the Preparatory Process and the Third World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, and document A/Conf 224/PC2/4, entitled Participation of Intergovernmental Organizations in the Work of the World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. We will consider these documents one by one. The committee will recall that by its resolutions of 68/211, the General Assembly recognize the importance of the contributions and participation of all relevant stakeholders, including non-governmental organizations, major groups, and intergovernmental organizations at the Third World Conference and its preparatory process. Are there any comments on documents A/Conf 224/PC2/3 and Addendum 1? May I take it that the Preparatory Committee wishes to approve the list of non-governmental organizations and other major groups as contained in documents A/Conf 224/PC2/3 and Addendum 1, who will participate as observers in the Third World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction? I hear no objections. It is so decided. Are there any comments on document A/Conf 224/PC2/4? May I take it that the committee wishes to approve the list of intergovernmental organizations as contained in document A/Conf 224/PC2/4, who will participate as observers in the Third World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction? I hear no objections. It is so decided. Distinguished delegates, I now invite the Preparatory Committee to consider Agenda Item 4, Organization of the World Conference. As participants are aware, the Third United Nations World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction is hosted by the government of Japan and will be held from Saturday the 14th to Wednesday the 18th in March 2015 in Sendai, Japan. At its first session, the Preparatory Committee agreed on the provisional agenda and provisional rules of procedure of the conference, as contained in documents A/Conf 224/1 and A/Conf 224/2, respectively. The note by the Secretariat on progress on the organization of the World Conference is contained in document A/Conf 224/PC2/5. I now give the floor to Ms. Margareta Wallström, Special Representative of the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, who will present the note by the Secretariat on progress on the organization of the World Conference. Document A/Conf 224/PC2/5, and the draft provisional program of work for the conference, which is document A/Conf 224/PC2/L1/revision 1.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Much work has been done since the report was issued, of course, so we take pleasure in updating you on this. As per the note issued, the note document A/Conf 224/PC2/5, the pace of preparations has significantly accelerated since that document was submitted for translation now a couple of months ago. Some very recent updates, in particular on the intergovernmental segment. There is still a plan for the host country and ourselves for between 6,000 to 8,000 delegates. And given the size and interest of the second Preparatory Committee meeting today, it could of course be even larger. The United Nations Secretary General has issued invitations to all heads of states, and there is of course a very important interest from the public as well. A call for substantive contributions to sessions was placed on the World Conference website at the end of October to encourage more inputs and momentum for stakeholder commitments and substantive contributions. For the World Conference, Emphasis has been placed on accessibility, disability access and inclusiveness. A strategy to make the conference site accessible to persons with disabilities is under development by the Conference Secretariat, the host country, Sendai Municipality, with the financial support of Nippon Foundation. On the intergovernmental segment, the details on modalities and formats of the Third World Conference of Disaster Risk Reduction are contained in the document entitled Program of Work, which is your A/conf224/PC2/L1 Rev1. As outlined in the revised program of work, the intergovernmental segment of the World Conference will consist of 9 plenary meetings, as well as 5 ministerial roundtables and 3 high-level multi-stakeholder partnership dialogues, which will be held in parallel with the plenary meetings. These meetings will all take place in the new conference building in the Sendai International Conference Center. On the plenary meetings, at the formal opening of the conference, which will take place in the morning of Saturday, the 14th of March, consideration will be given to all procedural and organizational matters. The topics of the ministerial roundtables are governing disaster risk, overcoming challenges. 2, international cooperation in support of post-2015 framework for disaster risk reduction. 3, reducing disaster risk in urban settings. 4, reconstruction after disasters, building back better. And 5, public investment strategies for disaster risk reduction. The ministerial roundtables will provide an opportunity for interactive and focused discussions on key priorities and actions in support of the implementation of the post-2015 framework for disaster risk reduction as it relates to each of the mentioned topics. Each roundtable will have ministers from government delegations and at least 5 for other participants among representatives of observers, entities of the United Nations systems, and other accredited intergovernmental organizations and major groups. 1 chairperson per roundtable will moderate the discussion. The chairs will be nominated by the 5 regional groups. The outcome of the roundtables will be presented by the co-chairs at the closing of the plenary meeting. Partnership dialogues. In addition to the roundtables, the program contains 3 high-level multi-stakeholder partnerships dialogues on 1, mobilizing women's leadership for disaster risk reduction. 2, risk-sensitive investments, the public-private partnerships. And 3, inclusive disaster risk management, governments, communities, and groups acting together. The 3 partnerships dialogues are open to all states, intergovernmental organizations, UN systems, and major groups, all participants. Each dialogue will have 2 co-chairs and a moderator. Each of the 5 regional groups will be invited to nominate 1 chair. Japan will serve as the 6th co-chair. 1 representative from the Secretariat will support the co-chairs. In addition, 4 to 5 high-level speakers for each dialogue will be selected by the co-chairs on the advice of the Conference Secretariat. The co-chairs will present the outcome of the dialogues at the conference plenary during the closing session. In addition to the intergovernmental segment, a multi-stakeholder segment and a public forum will also take place during the days 14th to 18th of March as part of the broader agenda of the 3rd UN Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. The multi-stakeholder segment will be held in the Sendai International Center and will be open to accredited and registered participants. The segment is composed of around 32 working sessions. The Sasakawa Award, the Risk Award, exhibitions, study tours, documentaries, TV, festivals, and many, many other events. The public forum, which will be held in venues open to the general public in the city of Sendai, is composed of several hundred side events, market booths, poster, other exhibitions, and we work closely with the host country, Japan, to accommodate the huge interest that already exists in the public forum. The whole Tohoku region is engaged in organizing the events in the public forum, And as Japan has already mentioned previously, a large organization is on the way for study tours and many other events. That concludes my update on the program of work for the World Conference. Thank you, Co-Chair.
I thank the Special Representative for her statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency Kenichi Suganuma, Ambassador in charge of the Third World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction of Japan, to provide an update on preparations for the conference.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and thank you, Ms. Margaret Wallström, the UN Special Representative for Disaster Risk Reduction, for the positive update on the state of the preparation. Indeed, our government is glad to report that the preparation for the organization of World Conference is progressing a lot. And that is thanks to the untiring devotion of the Secretariat, all the stakeholders in the preparation, and particularly the city of Sendai, which Vice Mayor Mr. Ito is present today, who will address us tomorrow afternoon, and all the other stakeholders in the preparation process. I have little to add to the report by the Special Representative. Maybe I will just mention that we are also working on making the conference green by the full cooperation with the ISDR. We will continue to work hard on the preparation to make the conference both fruitful and also pleasant for those coming in Sendai. And we look forward very much to welcoming all of you, and also many leaders, head of states, governments, and ministers to the conference in Sendai next March. Thank you.
I thank Ambassador Suganduma for his update. Before proceeding further, I should like to announce that for the first time in this Preparatory Committee, closed captioning is being provided in the hall, as you can see in the screen behind the podium. I should now like to invite the attention of the Preparatory Committee to the draft provisional program of work for the conference, issued as document A/Conf 224/PC2/L1 revision 1. Unfortunately, the document is currently not available in one UN language, and therefore we shall postpone its consideration until later in the meeting when all versions are made available. The edited English version of the document is now available in the room. I would therefore now like to turn the attention of the Preparatory Committee to document A/Conf 224/PC2/L2 on the endorsement of the President of the World Conference. The document contains a proposal to nominate Her Excellency Iriko Yamatani, Minister of State for Disaster Management of Japan, for the presidency of the World Conference. May I take it that the Preparatory Committee wishes to approve the nomination of Her Excellency Iriko Yamatani, Minister of State for Disaster Management of Japan, for the presidency of the World Conference, as proposed in document A/Conf 224/PC2/L2. It is so decided. Distinguished delegates, the Preparatory Committee will now turn to Agenda Item 5, Considerations on the Post-2015 Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. As you are aware, following the first session of the Preparatory Committee, the co-chairs had produced and circulated the pre-zero draft of the Post-2015 Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction on the 8th of August. We convened 15 meetings from the 5th of September to the 13th of October to conduct informal consultations on the pre-zero draft, which resulted in the production and circulation by the co-chairs of the zero draft on the 20th of October. During the consultations, the matter of identifying targets and indicators was raised. In this regard, we established an open-ended informal working group on targets and indicators to discuss these issues in greater detail. The informal working group has deliberated on this topic and has presented us as co-chairs with a report of its work. This work is now available on the official conference website. We will now hear an update on their discussions, and this update will be an additional reference for members as we conduct our negotiations today and tomorrow. I therefore wish to give the floor to His Excellency Wayne McCook, the Permanent Representative of Jamaica to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva, and Vice Chair of the Preparatory Committee, in his capacity as facilitator of this informal working group.
Thank you, Excellency, for giving me the floor to report on the work of the informal working group on targets and indicators, which I had the honor of facilitating. The working group was established by you co-chairs to look into targets and indicators identified in the zero draft of the post-2015 framework for disaster risk reduction. The group defined its terms of reference and held 4 meetings from 20 October through 12 November, and also held 1 joint meeting with major groups. Reports and information on each of the meetings, as you have indicated, are available on the World Conference website. Participation was open-ended for government representatives, UN organizations, the World Bank, and experts from national institutions, which were invited as observers. The main purpose of the group was to advise on the viability of the targets mentioned in paragraph 13 of the zero draft, and the group also considered linkages with relevant international agendas, including the Sustainable Development Goals, climate change agreements, and the World Humanitarian Summit process. Members indicated that the context and percentages to be addressed in targets and indicators will require further consideration to determine inter alia the implications for national governments. Regarding time frame, the group suggests consideration of a time frame of 15 years to align with the Sustainable Development Goals outlook and related international processes. In terms of baselines for targets, the group suggests at least 10 years preceding the start of any monitoring process. Regarding the scope of targets, some members requested to consider more positively oriented targets, slow onset disasters such as droughts, and small-scale localized disasters that will need further expert advice and consideration. The group considered the 5 global targets identified in paragraph 13 and further suggested 2 additional targets. Target 1 in the zero draft, of course, addressed the goal of reducing mortality by a given percentage in function of number of hazardous events. And the dates, of course, are to be determined. Considering absolute mortality figures per year, including missing persons, and the disaggregation of mortality data by age, gender, and people living with a disability were further suggestions for consideration arising from the deliberations. Target 2, reduce the number of affected people by a given percentage in function of number of hazardous events. The discussions turned inter alia on considering affected people as a combination of the number of injured, the number of people evacuated, the number of people relocated, houses damaged, and houses destroyed. These data were felt to be available in the majority of current disaster loss databases. Target 3, reduce disaster economic loss by a given percentage in function of number of hazardous events in relation to GDP. The group considered that it would be important to look at the reduction of direct economic loss in relation to GDP per capita per country. Direct economic loss should also include loss of livestock, loss of livelihood, and crops where data is available. Target 4, reduce disaster damage to health and educational facilities by a given percentage in function of number of hazardous events by a given period. Considering that education and health facilities are critical infrastructure and their damage due to disasters is commonly available, concrete, and verifiable. Nevertheless, the group suggests that further consultations are required to broaden or define or broaden the scope of Target 4 to cover other critical infrastructure and further consider disruption or closure rather than damage as the focus. Target 5, increase number of countries with national and local disaster risk reduction strategies by a given percentage by a date to be given. The group suggests the inclusion of climate change adaptation strategies and other relevant sustainable development strategies in this target in order to strengthen coherence with other agendas. The time frame can be shorter in this input target in the view of some members, for example by 2020, and in that process to consider integrated multi-hazard risk assessments as a foundation of national strategies. The group further suggests consultations to fully define the scope of Target 5. The group further deliberated 2 new proposed targets. Several members suggested a 6th target on international cooperation and global partnership to support the implementation of the post-2015 framework. 2 proposals were tabled that will need further consultations. And I read, international cooperation to stimulate the creation and strengthening of national capacities and technology transfer at the regional and sub-regional levels. And the other, increased flow of additional sustained and predictable means of implementation, in particular provision of financial resources for disaster risk reduction, including public investments, technology transfer, capacity building from developed countries to developing countries by a given percentage of GNI per year up to a given time. A 7th target was also proposed to increase the number of people, including vulnerable people, with access to early warning and risk information by a given percentage by a fixed period. Excellencies, this is what I can report on behalf of the informal working group and targets and indicators for the post-2015 framework on disaster risk reduction. Members have also offered comment on the effectiveness of targets and indicators overall and suggested that further discussion in this area would be useful. I thank you.
I thank Ambassador McCook for his presentation and hard work on this issue. I now invite the Preparatory Committee to turn its attention to the draft elements of a political declaration for the World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. The draft elements have been circulated by the co-chairs on behalf of the host country, Japan, on the 7th of November as a non-paper prior to this second session and now before you. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Misako Kaji, Deputy Permanent Representative of Japan to the United Nations Office and other international organizations in Geneva, an ex officio member of the Bureau of the Preparatory Committee, to introduce the draft elements of the political declaration for the World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction.
Thank you, co-chairs. As conveyed by the co-chairs to the Preparatory Committee at its first session in July, A/Conf 224/PC1/16, it is an honor for me as facilitator to introduce the elements of the political declaration of the Third World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction and its timeline. As mentioned by the co-chair, a 10-point elements paper has been distributed to the member states for their reflection, attached to the co-chair's letter, which welcomes the member states to share their views on the declaration during the following session this morning. The title Sendai Declaration is suggested with due acknowledgement of the host municipality of the conference, as was similarly chosen as the second conference in Hyogo Prefecture of Japan in 2005, and at the first conference in Yokohama City in 1994. Also, following the examples of the past political declarations, it is the facilitator's view shared to the Bureau that the declaration should be succinct in its form. The Sendai Declaration will essentially be based on the content of the main outcome of the Third World Conference, i.e., the post-2015 framework of disaster risk reduction. The elements paper was prepared to capture the points appeared in the zero draft of the framework document. The portion outlined as 10 points are not intended for the purpose of negotiation at this stage, but rather to act as a sounding board for the views to be expressed by the delegations during the following session this morning. Under the able guidance of the co-chairs, the facilitator will carefully listen to the interventions during this session and note down the points made on the declaration. All contributions from the delegations, including written submissions as required, shall be utilized as inputs for a draft on the declaration. The draft text thus compiled shall be presented to the member states at a later date for their reflection, and a consultation process to finalize the text is to be called for. The timing of the aforementioned process will depend upon the progress made on the consideration of the framework document, but presumably at the margin of the consultations previewed on the latter. Bearing in mind the projected deadline for the consultation, for the conclusion of the consultation on the framework document at end January 2015, the facilitator deems it important that the considerations on the Sendai Declaration shall also be concluded by this time. The Sendai Declaration is to be adopted on March 18, 2015, the last day of the World Conference. The facilitator confirms hereby that the ownership of the Sendai Declaration rests with member states, reflecting the collective manifestation by the international community. Views and recommendations from the major groups and other stakeholders are expected to be reflected in the declaration through possible inputs by the member states. I thank you, Co-Chair.
I thank Ambassador Kaji for her presentation. Delegations are welcome to provide comments on the draft political declaration in their general statements, or to send their comments in writing to the delegation of Japan. Before proceeding to hear general statements from delegations, I wish to make a proposal concerning the time limit for statements. In order to allow for maximum participation during this session of the Preparatory Committee, it is proposed that member states speaking on behalf of groups will be allowed 3 minutes for their statements, while member states speaking in their national capacities and all other speakers will be allowed 2 minutes for their statements. May I take it that the Preparatory Committee agrees with this proposal? I hear no objections. It is so decided. I now open the floor for general statements. Delegations are encouraged to adhere to the time limits as agreed and to provide their full written statements to the Secretariat for posting on the official conference website.